So welcome to those of you who have just entered the room. I'm pretty sure we'll hear that buzzing sound a few more times. I hope it's not just me hearing it and that all of you are hearing it. More people will enter in as we continue throughout the next couple of minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you find yourself around the world. I know it was kind of tricky to find an appropriate time considering where all of our members live, reside, and teach around the world. So we're so happy that so many of you were able to make it. And this session is being recorded, as you are hearing, as has been prompted. So just be aware of that in case you miss anything, in case some of your colleagues weren't here. Of course, we'll happily share the recording of this discussion. And it is an intimate setting. We aren't expecting too many people because you are somewhat of a select group of people that we have spoken to over the course of the last number of weeks, really, as the Global Business School Network. And it's so good to see some of your faces up on the screen again. I hope no introductions necessary to myself, Maddie, and Dan, representing the Global Business School Network. But I just very briefly want to say hi to Ben Schmidt and Michelle Crimes, who you'll see on your screens, depending on what your current view is in little squares. They represent the Center for International Private Enterprise, and we've partnered up with them, as we explained to you in our meetings leading up to this particular session, because they speak exactly to the mission of GBSN, and we've found there's so much synergy that exists between GBSN and SIPE. So that's what we're here to talk to you about, the research process that we're looking to enter into, hopefully with some of the schools involved here. Dan's going to take over for just a second before he further leads you into Ben and Michelle. We're aiming to cover ground for about 30 minutes or thereabouts. We beg your indulgence, and we'll then keep as much time as possible for questions. I do want to say right now at the outset, if you could just enter your name into the chat, let everyone else know who you are, where you're from, which schools you're representing. That would be really useful for us to get a roll call, but also just for schools to interact with each other. That would be great. And of course, if you have any questions throughout the course of the hour, as soon as the question enters your brain, hit it into the chat box and we'll try and address them. If not immediately, if the moment fits, certainly do so towards the end of the session. So again, just at the risk of repeating myself for those last couple of people who've entered in the room, you haven't missed too much just yet. Introduce yourself in the chat, please. And I'll hand over to Dan. And it's chilled, as the kids would say. So we don't need to be too serious this afternoon or morning or evening. Dan Leclerc is the CEO of the Global Business School Network. Dan, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thanks, Rob, for the great introduction to this meeting. I'll keep it brief. I did want to say, or add my welcome to Michelle and Ben. It's nice to see all the scholars and leaders of business schools on the line, and our meetings have started, I think more than weeks ago, Rob, months ago, and it's really nice to see us reach this stage where it's essentially a launch, right, of an initiative that we think is very important moving forward. But I'm going to stop now because we have a lot to cover, and I'm going to turn it over to our colleague, Michelle. Michelle, you can tell the group a little bit about yourself, perhaps before you start, and I'm sure they'll learn a lot about SIPE as we move along. But it's all yours, Michelle.
Great, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to meet everyone today. It's nice to put some names and some faces together. So I'm really glad to be here, and we're really glad to be launching this event today, or launching the beginning of what we hope will be a long and fruitful relationship. So my name is Michelle Crimes. I am working with the Center for International Private Enterprise. We're based in DC. We are a nonprofit. We are funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, if you're familiar with that. We are part of the NED's core institutes. There are four, one being SIPE, NDI, RDI, and then also Solidarity Center. We consider those to be our sister institutes or our sister organizations. We often work with them. And we focus mostly on anti-corruption compliance in my division, which is Anti-Corruption Governance Center. And on top of that, Ben is here with me. I thought, Ben, I'd allow you to say a few words about yourself if you'd like, and then I'll go back and introduce myself and start on my part.
Yeah, I introduced myself in the chat. I'm Ben. I handle a lot of the communications and blog and website side of Anti-Corruption Governance Center. Really excited to help out Michelle here in kind of laying out the vision today.
Thanks, Ben. So part of the reason why I'm here is that I also have a very strong background in anti-corruption compliance. I'm an attorney of many years now. We won't say how many years at this point. And I work specifically in rule of law, anti-corruption, and I've done so for about the past 15 years. I spent some time working at the American Bar Association and then on some very large projects in Central America as well as Asia and Africa. And then I've spent the last 8 years of my career as a corruption compliance attorney working on mostly FCPA, SEC investigations from Walmart to Lava Jato, and then some pretty big other big cases that came out of Brazil. So part of the reason that we're here today is to really talk with you about a project that we're hoping to launch. So I thought I would give you a little bit of background about private sector corruption, which is my area of specialties. So as we know, corruption in the private sector, it's a global issue. It covers everything from theft, bribery, fraud, embezzlement, procurement schemes. But we know that it has a toll on the economy and it's massive. The World Bank estimates that corruption adds about 10% to the cost of total of doing business, and that this is a particularly high cost in emerging markets, which is where CIPE tends to work. It adds about an additional 25% to an actual contract. And Transparency International has done a little bit of research on this too. And it says, and they've said that, company leaders that engage in bribery and other corrupt practices, they increase costs, they introduce uncertainties, they create reputational risk, and they really make the economy overall vulnerable to corruption. And it's interesting because, as I'm sure some of you know, some people think that corruption is a cost that you must pay. And while that can be debatable, what these perceptions about corruption really tell us is that there is a need to better educate businesses on business integrity and to help support them in their compliance programs. And that's specifically what CIPE does. We work with small and medium enterprises to help them understand that. There are some major laws such as the US FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and then the UK Bribery Act, most recently laws coming out of Brazil, laws also in France, which really help to criminalize corporate corruption. And these laws have been the motivating force, which help companies to now think about having codes of conduct, having business integrity programs, implementing anti-corruption compliance, and really just overall discouraging dishonest business practices. Perfect. Okay, sorry, just making sure the slides were matching me. Perfect. Okay. So when I talk about anti-corruption compliance in GVS and sort of what we're hoping to do, we have an understanding here at CIPE that these laws have really influenced most multinational corporations to have compliance training on a regular basis. And so that means pretty much any MNC that you might go to will have some sort of anti-corruption compliance training. And over the last few years, CIPE has been working on expanding our understanding of compliance, people such as myself. And then we also work with small and medium-sized enterprises because we often find that either they don't have the capacity to have these sorts of compliance training programs that are needed, or they just don't understand it. Maybe they don't think it's worth the cost, but we're trying to create the same parallel structures that exist for MNCs within small and medium organizations, and for their purposes, so that they can be in the supply chain of a larger multinational corporation. The thing that we've discovered is that it's not quite clear to us sort of how these training programs work, why they work. And then there's also less of an understanding about how they might work in what we would call an emerging market. And so we want to be able to understand this issue. We'd also like to be able to perhaps improve some of the work that we do. And so that's part of the reason why we've partnered with GBSN to sort of understand what this looks like in emerging markets and to give us a better understanding of what happens. And so I hope that is pretty clear on our background, why we're here, how we got here. And then I'm going to turn things over to, I believe Ben is next on our lineup.
That's right. There we go. So just before we dived into kind of what kind of research exists out there evaluating the impact of compliance on businesses, we just looked at corporate training generally. And there's an important distinction in the literature on training in a corporate setting or in a business setting between the concept of training and education. Training is like practical instruction on how to do this, how to do that, how to follow this procedure, how to follow this process, how to get it right. Education, on the other hand, usually refers to helping the staff just understand the underlying principles. Why are we following this process? Why does this procedure exist? What problems is this solving? And ideally, an anti-corruption compliance program is going to give both. It's going to help staff understand the processes and procedures, but it's also going to help them understand, why are we doing this? What is the issue with corruption? What does it do to our organization when it exists? And why is that bad? And why are we trying to get rid of that? And so with that distinction in mind, our review of the existing literature is beneficial to you as researchers, as those who work in an academic area at these concepts, because the findings that already exist can help create launching points for you, starting points to start looking at the impact of compliance in emerging markets. So you can replicate, or you can take ideas from what's already been done and see how maybe they're different or the same in emerging markets. And second, already the existing research that we have, it's very recent, these studies that have been done about compliance, they already start to show evidence that we can use in the education portion, and that can be used generally by people in educating staff on, so why is compliance important, and what actually happens when we do this right? How is the business going to benefit? How is it going to change? And so we hope that through this, through funding more research, together with GBSN, we're going to be able to help businesses. We're going to be able to help ourselves as an organization that does compliance training go beyond that superficial box checking exercise of, we're doing compliance, check, 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 to helping businesses create that culture of integrity and accountability. I'll pass it back to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Ben. So I think the important thing to sort of touch base on is sort of, where do we stand with anti-corruption compliance today? As I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the most recent and largest anti-corruption case that has probably impacted, I'm trying to think of where it didn't impact, was of course Lava Jato out of Brazil. It was an FCPA investigation, but it wasn't just FCPA. It brought in anti-corruption compliance or laws from all over the world. And it was really, I think, a very interesting case study in sort of how the world is moving more towards anti-corruption compliance. Because we're seeing higher enforcement for FCPA, UK Bribery Act, of course, companies all over the world now have chief integrity officers. They have chief compliance officers. We have seen that they are moving towards having stronger compliance. And what we're really interested in is understanding how these enforcement actions act as a stick, but then also how compliance can move forward, and as Ben has already mentioned, in emerging markets in particular, because we have a strong suspicion, because of the work that we do, that it's a little bit different in emerging markets, and we're very specific. We're very interested in understanding that, so that we can help businesses understand in a better way what needs to happen. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan.
Great, thank you so much. This is great. We're moving quickly through the content presentations, and there's always a good balance between moving quickly enough, but not moving so quickly that we leave everyone behind. So I did want to just pause for a moment and make sure that we actually go back a little bit to the beginning and remind you of why we're here. For us, context is really, really important, and working together with all of you and doing it in a way that appreciates your understanding and commitment to the context is very important to us. So we're going to get to that in just a moment. But what I want to do is talk about what we've learned in general. And again, this is just meant as a starting point, not as a way of us understanding or feeling like we understand. And this, we need to give credit. A colleague of Ben and Michelle named Jackman from Sheffield University, if I remember correctly. Was it Sheffield? Michelle? Ben?
Sussex.
Sussex. I knew it was an S. I apologize for that, but he did some really good work. Jumping in, if I remember correctly, he's from Senegal. Ben, was he from Senegal? I hope I didn't mess that one up either. Yeah, but he came from the African context and is a graduate student at Sussex, working on this field, essentially. And he did a really good job of trying to gather what we think we understand about the effectiveness of compliance training. Now, there was much more than the 3 articles shown here, which may be familiar to all of you. I know most of the experience in the room has been in understanding public sector corruption and training accordingly. But when we began to look at private sector anti-corruption, these 3 articles popped up. And they, in summary, indicate that there's some reason to believe that anti-corruption compliance training does indeed work, at least to some extent. With the Warren paper, a study on bankers in the US, and the idea was that she concluded, or they concluded, that it has an impact, a positive impact on the culture of the organization. Jonathan West and colleagues studied city organizations around the, again, United States, and discovered that it has a positive impact on productivity and the like. Hauser looked at attitudes and discovered that the pre and post attitudes towards typical justifications for corrupt behaviors mean something different. In fact, that they no longer buy into these typical justifications as a consequence of the training. So there's some indication that anti-compliance training, or not anti-compliance training, anti-corruption and compliance training does indeed work. But GBSN, as you know, is very focused, it's written into our mission, on local relevance. And for us, we could not find significant, at least published research, trying to understand the effectiveness of anti-corruption and compliance training and education in developing world contexts, where it's obviously very important, as well as in the developed world context. And for us, this is really important. And I think in many ways defines what we're trying to do here. Now, there's another challenge, which we're not sure we could rise to, but the research also really doesn't hit on behavior change and whether or not compliance, education, and training really does make a difference in terms of actual behaviors. Whether that's attainable or not, we shall find out, but at least from a starting point, understanding in context changes in attitudes, changes in culture, and things like that, replicating perhaps some of the research that has been done, creating new types of research projects, either qualitative or quantitative, but very much focused on the context is what we're looking for. And in essence, what we're looking for is to improve our understanding at GBSN and at SIPE, and with each one of you, our understanding about what kinds of education and training works and what doesn't. And from there to do a better job of improving essentially the way markets work and the way organizations behave and the opportunities they face in their markets. So if you want to skip to the next slide, the overall research question that we're aiming to address with your help is as such: what are the factors that make anti-corruption compliance training more or less effective in the specific emerging market context? So we have 5 contexts here, and we are very interested in exploring this. And I'm going to turn it over to Ben to talk a little bit more about the process and the expectations generally.
Sure. So we don't want this to be too onerous, but we do want to fund high quality research. And so this would be essentially our expectation for a research proposal. In Dan's presentation just now, he talked about Danielle Warren, who looked at organizational culture. And in that study, they operationalized what they meant by organizational culture, how they were going to track it, and what they expected, what they expected and what they found. And what we would want is something like that. We would want to know kind of what is your area, what do you want to look at? Is it organizational culture like Danielle Warren? West looked at productivity. Hauser looked at attitudes. We're really interested in behavior change at an individual level, at a team level, at an organization-wide level. So we want to know, so what is your specific angle? What are you expecting to find? What are your variables and how are you going to operationalize them? What are your conditions that would confirm or not confirm your expected finding? What are the tests that you're going to create? And again, this can be draft form, but we want to see some detail. What are some actual tests that you can perform, either surveys or interviews, or there's a variety of ways, and we'll definitely be sharing the existing research with you so you can have it. And then what do you need access to in order to conduct those tests? SIPE as an organization, we have a pretty deep emerging market network of partners and of friends and of colleagues that are engaged or involved with compliance in one way or another. And if we can make introductions or connect you to folks that can help you gain better access than you might already have, we're here to help. And then the preliminary work plan and our hope that the timeline wouldn't be 6 years, but closer to 6 months, since that will be written into the grant agreement. And so those proposals we are asking for and looking for and really excited about receiving, with the hopes that this can be of interest to you as well, and being a part of a global team who will all be working on this topic kind of along the same timeline over the next 6 to 12 months.
Thank you, Ben. And at this point in time, I just wanted to briefly go over the timeline with all of you that we have set for right now. So we're looking at those research proposals that Ben just mentioned, due hopefully Tuesday, August 31st, and of course, flexibility there. And then we're looking at selecting proposals in early September with agreements signed by September 30th and research beginning, of course, by October 1st. And then we're hoping to have our first community of learning event in January of 2022 to kind of check in and see all of the great work that you have been doing. And then looking ahead from there, of course, we're hoping of developing anti-corruption community of learning events. As said before, we're looking at doing these quarterly, bringing all of you together, researchers, specialists, practitioners, to present, share, and discuss results. Some of these, of course, could be some of the previously mentioned researchers. So that would be a really great opportunity. And then finally, a final virtual or in-person event, bringing together all of researchers to present findings. And now I believe Rob is going to be in charge of the question and answer section. I noticed that there were already a couple of questions in the chat, and so we are happy to address those now.
Great, thanks, Maddie, and Ben, Michelle, and Dan, who are all going to jump in at various points depending on what your questions are. So either raise your hand, unmute yourself, whatever's easiest. We're a small enough group. We're not going to be too strict on any rules. So just to confirm Kemi's question in the chat, as I mentioned at the start, this recording will be made available as well as the slide decks and any other kind of, we've got a handout as well that we'll email following on this meeting in case you'd like to share it, well, keep it for yourself, share it with your colleagues who are unable to attend and to whom this may be of interest as well. There are a couple of process questions I noticed, but also just generally questions around, maybe I'll start with Dalton's question, and I don't know whether Dan or Ben or Michelle, you'd like to have a stab. To better understand, will each researcher have their individual plan, or will there be a stage of consolidation of ideas and a single line of research for everyone?
Definitely want Dan to we had extended conversations about this. Should we make them, in research design, you can have vary the location, but make all of the research designs kind of as close together as possible. So you're just varying the place, but all the research is the same. Or you can just let everyone just kind of run their own direction and just give absolute freedom to every research team or every research individual. And what we kind of wanted was kind of in the middle. We want variations on a theme. We have expectations about what we're most interested in learning about. We've given you a research question that this is what we really want to know. But we don't want to give everyone a cookie cutter mold of this is what all the research needs to look like. And so I would say to Dalton, every researcher should have their own plan. And we want to be variations that would be your own on this theme that we're giving.
Dalton, I just want to make sure you're happy with that. That was clear enough. Do you have a follow-up? You're still on mute. There you go.
Yes, Rob, it's okay to answer. That was my doubt about if you, because actually we are just launched a program for small and medium companies in Brazil. And we have the wish that until next year, we can reach around 1,000 people for the small medium companies. So I think there is a very good group for research to test some ideas and how effective can be our program. So, but maybe that makes no sense for the others. What we could do at this point. So that my question, that's the reason of my question.
Great. And then Mia, so I know you had a question early on and then a subsequent question now. So I just want to clarify, were you clear on the ethics versus the compliance? Do you still have questions around that? Do you want to expand on that question?
Thanks, Rob, and thanks for the answers that you gave me. I think we can have a good conversation about the role of ethics and the role of compliance. There has been research that show the more you focus on compliance, the less ethics you get. because compliance may drive a minimalist kind of approach. But that's a different discussion for a different time. I think the main thing for now is I don't want to stop at compliance. I want to go further than compliance into ethics, if that's okay.
So from my perspective, that would be okay, because at least in my line of work and how I set up my trainings, and at least the way that I like to discuss it, I actually think they need to go hand in hand, because I'm always sort of having this conversation. I think Ben referenced it earlier. How do you not have a checklist culture, which is what I think you're referring to, where you're checking the box, but you're maybe ignoring all of the context and what you're doing. I always say that your context matters. And for me, the context is the ethics, right? You have to behave properly. And then you have systems in place that might let you know if you have a red flag, or maybe if there's something that you need to pay attention to. So I think having a discussion, your discussion, include both of those. Of course, I would love to see that. So thank you for asking that question. It's important.
And I love that idea that you could look at, ethics focus. If there was a business in Brazil or in South Africa, or that was very focused on ethics, and you were to, have a bunch of tests about the effectiveness and about the change, and then another that's very focused on just the compliance, just the procedure, and to compare and see what you might glean from those differences. What was the different impact? If I was a researcher, that would be something that I would be fascinated in knowing and in comparing. And sorry, Rob, go ahead.
No, absolutely. That's helpful. Thank you. And then Mias's follow-up question, which is something we've also spent a lot of time internally discussing. So I don't know, either again, Ben or maybe Dan, talking to publication of the results and I guess the research anyway, and by extension, ownership of the content, I guess would be a question that follows. So I don't know whether Dan or Ben, whether you want to.
Yeah, our goal is to make it as the entire process as simple as possible. Traditional grants at the size that we're talking about, it's going to take a little bit longer than, for example, there's two ways that we can technically do it. We can hire you to create research that you would be the owner of at the end, and we would also be, GBSN Insight would also be able to benefit from, or we provide you with a grant in which you have full rights to everything. We don't have any except for what, the permissions you give us to use it. The grant is a little bit longer of a process, and, hiring you to create research that you own and that we can use as well is a little bit faster, but they're essentially the same thing. In the end, it's your research and your intellectual property that you can use for publication and anything else that you do.
I think a little bit along the lines too, in terms of how we might launch it and how we might publish it. We would probably have some sort of, just depends on what's happening in the world. We would have some sort of launch, right? We'd have to see how things sort of pan out. CIPE really likes publishing things. We like to put together consolidations of research. We could have an option like that, but as Ben has sort of referred to, ultimately it might come down to what feels most comfortable for you. But no matter what feels the best for you, we actually have lots of ways that we could launch it, including virtual events, in-person events if those are happening again, and finding opportunities for you to also be able to publish your research.
And maybe just to add a similar response from GBSN's perspective, we support your desires as it relates to the research, and we'll work together with CIPE to make a big deal out of it in other contexts, right? I think Ben and Michelle, one of the things I heard you say, I think, was we don't want to stand in the way of academic publications that may come out of this. Definitely not stand in the way. So
that's right. we want this to be yours, and we're just hoping that we might learn from you, but we really actually find this to be a great way to support the community that talks about ethics and anti-corruption, adding something. We think this is a new area to talk about. And so we see a small niche, and we're hoping that we can support you in exploring that a bit more, and then also perhaps use whatever information that you're able to gather together to also help us improve the work that we're doing. Because, for example, Dalton, what you're talking about, the work that you're doing, that's exactly the sort of thing that SIPE is doing. And we'd be curious to know and have lessons learned so that we can increase what SMEs know about compliance and ethics and help them to become stronger, because we think that overall supports an economy, especially in the emerging market, and then overall it supports democracy, right? Because you've got transparent flows of money, you don't have corruption, you're not increasing costs, and so for us it's a very important issue to understand.
Thanks for that. I think it can be very useful if one can do a little bit of both. As academics, it's important to do journal publications, but we also know that it's only academics that read journal publications. So if one can have a summarized other report as well that we can use into the business world, it can have a big impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Mias. Kemi, please, you're welcome to unmute yourself.
Well, thank you. So I was wondering, I think that in the process of trying to put things together, we might find some institutions that we could approach, and they might ask us what's in it for them. Maybe not exactly like that, but like, will they have access to the data afterwards as well? So for example, there might be entities that are also involved in anti-corruption training, and therefore it might be interesting to try and liaise with them to do the research. Or there might be societies for governance, or there might be associations of compliance officers. I'm just wondering, to what extent can we offer them access to the data as well in order to get them to cooperate?
So from my perspective, this actually sort of goes back to what we were saying before. The research and the data is actually yours. And so if you would like to be able to share I understand you need to sort of give them a leveraging factor in order for them to want to participate. From my perspective, sharing is better, especially if it gives you the opportunity to pull someone in who may not otherwise be interested. And so if you want to be able to share, I think we can make sure that whatever sort of grant agreement we come up with, it sort of gives you the freedom to be able to do that. So I think Dan has said, and I will reiterate, we're looking really to support you, and we're hoping that as the same way that you might give that organization access to your recommendations, final results, that sort of thing, that we would also get access in that way. That's what we're hoping for.
Thanks so much.
No, no problem. Good question.
It looks like we've
got plenty of time.
The Brazilians here. I would just say obrigado.
Thanks, Ben.
Great, Ben. Great.
Thanks so much. So we still have plenty of time. I mean, unless there are no further questions, we're more than happy to take more. I don't know, Dan, whether there's anything that you wanted to add.
Not anything in particular, but maybe just reinforcing some things might be helpful. Just not to artificially use up time, but even before this call, several people suggested that me talking about some other work that might be related could be helpful. One example is that we're right now working a little bit to try to understand diversity, equity, and inclusion training. And one of the things that we're learning is that overall, they perhaps don't work as effectively as we thought they could. On the other hand, if we begin to drill down and isolate some factors that are potentially important, we begin to understand why and can improve as a consequence. One example is that this difference between requiring the training and not requiring the training. Apparently, in very current research, to require DEI training often has the opposite effect than intended, right? Especially when it comes to things like inclusion, whereas making it voluntary has motivational aspects that become pretty interesting. So beginning to really understand and validate what works, to begin to uncover what factors stand in the way of things working is really important to us. You know, our mission at GBSN, as a reminder, is to improve access to quality, locally relevant management education for the developing world. And that means we need to understand better what works and what doesn't in the contexts that we care most about. So this work is really important to us. We value the relationship with SIPE to help us, to enable us to do this. It's a small project, but we do indeed hope it grows, and we're gonna nurture it to help it grow. We want you to connect with each other. We want to facilitate connections with practitioners that enable you to continue doing this work. And we want to build new, bigger projects that might be cross-border, instead of the, you know, everyone working on their own. We may discover there's some similarities that we could build and build an even larger grant process. So we're really excited about this. We can't wait to get this going, to see your proposals, to support them, not just, again, with a little bit of money, but for us, it's very important that we support you through the network and through the opportunities that we create. So, did I generate any additional questions?
Well, I did notice, I don't know. I know Mias's hand is up, and Kimmy, I don't know whether your hand is up again or whether from the previous occasion, but Mias, you can
Sorry, it's the old one.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks, Rob. Dan, I think I remember that in our meeting, we also discussed that this might lead into the development of a training program. Is that still on the cards and probably will be only looked at and planned later?
You know, in general, yes. It's hard to be specific about something like this, not, you know, not having gotten into some of this yet, but definitely if we could build better programs as a consequence of this work, it would be an opportunity, I think, that would be hard to pass up, especially if we could think about it in a collaborative way with SIPE. If we could think about it in a way that helps us to address very much the context and do it across different contexts, I think that would be great. I think it's hard to specify it as a specific objective yet, but certainly we hope to build.
We've talked about learning labs from the very beginning, but until, you know, we're farther along and it's hard to say exactly how we do it, but that idea has been from the genesis of this project. It's been part of it. So if there was a way to incorporate that, we'd jump on it. We'd make it happen. We'd help.
Exactly, and just to sort of reinforce what Ben is saying, the really unique and different thing about SIPE is that while we are a development organization, we are funded by the NED, which, if you're familiar with the National Endowment for Democracy, they can be very experimental, right? And so we have the ability to, if we sort of work on this and we see, oh, there are some other interesting directions that we might want to take, it's really great because we could continue. That's why I said I hope we have a long and fruitful relationship, because it could be something that could develop into something more. The NED, the way that we're funded, helps us to be able to do that. So that's something to keep in mind. This isn't sort of the way that USAID funding might work, or DRL, or funding that might come from other organizations. We have quite a bit of flexibility, and ACGC in particular, our programs area, we tend to be, we think of ourselves as the incubator of SIPE, and we come up with all sorts of ideas and we try to bring them to fruition. So we will follow threads wherever they go. And so we'll naturally follow things as they develop. So, but you never know what might happen.
And just to answer your comment, Dalton, I will be providing the recording and the presentation and the written version of all of this information following the meeting. So no worries there. I'll also be providing a list of everyone who is a member of this learning group so that you can connect as necessary.
Thank you.
And Rob, we just had an interesting comment from Catherine. Would it be possible, Catherine, for you to explain kind of what your context is in your country that as far as compliance? Yeah, love to hear.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Dan. Great to see you, Michelle, Rob, Ben. I was thinking about a previous comment here at the meeting, and I was thinking about which approach was probably best. We can explore to the issue of compliance in general. I mean, we're going to discuss that amongst our researchers, but we could do some exploratory work on compliance since the research question is so much focused around what works and doesn't work. And I think Dan has made that quite clear. But to be realistic, it's perhaps our contribution could be far stronger in terms of ethics. Again, both results can feed into business schools in general and our own curriculum and events that we host, etc. So both are quite useful as inputs into that process in which business schools have to really make a difference moving forward. So, you know, we are probably going to discuss with our econometricians what we could do with the corporate world that we're in touch with permanently to see if we can get some econometrics that it's valuable in terms of compliance. I mean, if we can design perhaps a model that can capture some of that. In terms of multinational organizations, as you know, Colombia has several emerging multilatinas, and they are quite consolidated. Some of them, there aren't many in the Colombian context, but in Colombia, we do have many other multilatinas and emerging market multinationals at work. So we'd have to discuss which type of sample we could use from the private sector. So that would be my initial comments in terms of compliance, to see if we can build something that statistically may provide some insights into this. But I would say in terms of ethics, we have far more trajectory in our context. So perhaps our proposal could be focused on that. So I have Ulf here with me. There's Jose, one of our top econometricians. And there's other people that work with us. They can't be in the meeting today. Here we have Carolina as well. So we have a team of different people. Perhaps they have a different view. So our commitment would be to explore whether we can suggest some statistical approach to the issue of compliance, or perhaps another type of more qualitative, study. But I would say perhaps ethics, knowing researchers, my own colleagues, would be a preference for them working on that, because they've already done that for some years in our context. So, and they are experts as well in public sector issues. So it'd be quite interesting for them as a research exercise to focus on private institutions. So, and the private sector. So that would be my comment in general as to how perhaps our proposal will reach you. So let's see how it goes.
That's really helpful, Catherine. I think I would just suggest, if it's possible, in the proposal to have at least one connection to compliance in some way or some fashion. If it's an ethics focused, that's awesome. But if there's at least one way to loop in, you know, whether it's Ford Andina, you know, some multinational that operates in Colombia that does compliance training in country, if there's at least one connection you can make to specific compliance and make the rest of it kind of more focused on the ethics side, that'll really be helpful so that we are kind of all connected on the same theme.
Yeah, sure. We understand it's quite important compliance, so we'll try to include that.
Whether it's helpful or not, in fact, it might not even be right. But you know, one way sometimes I think about ethics is that it sometimes gets at the why part a little bit more effectively, and that does become important, at least in our understanding about what works and what doesn't. Often, if you don't address the why, it's hard to change attitudes and behaviors. So that might be one sort of connecting point to the kinds of things that we're talking about. This is great. We're excited about the possibilities. There must be some specific questions, additional specific questions about the process or the projects, the grants. Any more before we?
I've just asked Maddie in the meantime to maybe just share the timeline slide again. That may be helpful in terms of bringing up any potential questions and the requirements as well. So we are looking at the end of August for submissions and for proposals to be sent through.
I guess we didn't talk much about budget and how this works out. We've set aside money for this. It's not a huge pot, I guess you would describe, but a beginning. And I think the idea is that we would support grants between 5 and 10 initially. Ben, do you want to comment on that, or Michelle, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Between $5,000 and $10,000 grants,
U.S. dollars, yeah.
U.S. dollars is the division size that fits the pot as it currently stands.
Right, and again, thought of as an initial, and the way that that ends up, it depends on the number and quality, I suppose, of the submissions, right? Obviously what the ask is in terms of our support. We think that a lot of our support comes in non-financial ways by connecting you with each other, connecting you with potential organizations through the site relationships, but also beginning to build around us a community of scholars working on similar questions that then become opportunities for larger projects. So, oh, you're okay, there you go. you're giving a moving
Apologies.
target. But I think the overall timeline, and I assume there'll be a formal letter specifying these following up on this meeting, right?
Yeah.
And I think we should talk about that. So we're following up with the information that we shared here in both PowerPoint format, and then Maddie has prepared a longer, just written document with this information on it. And when we're in, once we've established contact with everyone via email, we can take additional questions, more specific questions offline and clarify.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say that, Ben, by all means, when you receive all of these documentation from Maddie in the coming days, and certainly in the next couple of weeks with any clarifying questions, feel free to just send that through via email. You can send them to Maddie. She'll make sure that she'll filter them with the rest of us and whoever can best answer the question, and we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as we can with whatever answers you need. So by all means, don't hesitate to reach out to ask any clarifying and follow-up questions. We're 4 minutes. I'm not going to keep us longer than we absolutely need to. So pending no further questions, I want to say thanks to Michelle and Ben in particular from a GBSN point of view. We're very excited to be partnering with SAIP on this journey. And as Michelle alluded to a couple of times, we're hoping that this is going to be a fairly lengthy journey. And a lot of that's going to depend on the submissions and the research that you carry out as effectively the rest of you part of the Global Business School Network. So thanks to all of you for your time in all different parts of the world. We hope you're keeping safe, staying away from this dreaded virus, and hopefully you've been lucky enough to be vaccinated if you have been, but please keep safe and have regard for one another. And we will be in touch with all of the information, all of the details via email, and we're so good to see so many of your faces. So thanks so much for coming, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks so much, all.